Tonight, after more than a century, justice is served for a regiment of valiant soldiers whose story you may be hearing for the very first time. In 1917, members of the all-black Army unit known as the Buffalo Soldiers were assigned to guard the construction site of a training camp for white soldiers in Houston, Texas, where they endured discrimination and violence in the Jim Crow South. But after 2 black soldiers were assaulted and arrested, a riot ensued. Less than 24 hours after a military court convicted the first group of murder and mutiny, over a dozen soldiers, black soldiers, were hanged, marking the single largest mass execution of American soldiers by the Army in U.S. history. A headline in the local San Antonio Express newspaper captured their deaths. 13 Negroes executed is what it said. Now, among those men was Jesse Ball Moore of the 3rd Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment. And today, 106 years later, the Army is formally overturning Moore's convictions and that of more than 100 other soldiers, acknowledging that they were wrongfully treated because of their race and they were not given fair trials. Now, joining me now is a member of Moore's family, Fatimah Gilliam. Fatimah, thank you for being here. Earlier today, the Army held this ceremony for the families, marking this moment when their convictions were vacated after over 100 years. What was it like to hear your uncle Jesse's name and knowing that it has formally now been cleared?
Well, I'm very glad that he's finally getting an honorable discharge from the Army. But I have to admit, when I watched the ceremony, I definitely cried. I cried multiple times. And it's sad to think about so many soldiers, 110 soldiers affected like this, and families like mine, where my great-great-uncle Jesse Ball Moore was executed, and he didn't get to live out his life in its full entirety.
One of the really crazy things about this story is how quickly it all unfolded. They were convicted and then immediately executed. And that's one of the big injustices, it seems, of this story that for so many people, I mean, I just being honest, myself included, it was lost to history.
Lost to history, but it's really important to note. So they had the trial. All of these people were represented by one person who wasn't even a lawyer. And then they, quickly turned around with the convictions. People like my uncle Jesse was executed before even Washington was informed. So there was no process for there to be an appeal, for there to be clemency. But what did happen after this trial is that the U.S. military did change its process and created an appeals process, which the Army never had prior to this.
In addition to setting aside the convictions, the Army is also taking some other steps, like giving these soldiers proper gravestones. Mm-hmm. This is so important. Also making their descendants, perhaps yourself included, but just eligible for benefits. I mean, military service for so many Americans was basically a ticket to the middle class because of those benefits not available to people who were the descendants of the victims of this incident.
Right, and I will say in terms of military service, my family has participated in every American war going back to the American Revolution. And I'm glad that my uncle is being honored in a way for his service. But yes, I mean, I see this as a great miscarriage of justice over time, and I'm glad that it's being recognized. And I'm glad that it means that, yes, these people are going to get tombstones. Some of them already have tombstones, but a lot of them were thrown into a mass grave, unmarked, for many, many years.
One of the historians who worked on this to request the clemency said that this is not political, but we are in an incredibly political climate in which just even the talk of this kind of history, some people seem to want to bury it. The idea of reparations, which now I think becomes more possible for the family members of these men, is on the table, but that's political too. Where do you think this decision by the Army to make this step leaves us on those conversations?
I think we need to have more of these kinds of conversations. I mean, I'm always somebody that has been a proponent of things like reparations, but I also think what we need to be doing is analyzing what's happening with history in this country. Like, as you alluded to with politics, we're in a time where we're banning books, we're engaged in revisionist history. And as we do that, that means there are going to be more stories like this that we don't hear about, and it just creates an environment where we can have continuation of a miscarriage of justice for new generations of people.
Yeah. All right, Fatimah Gilliam, thank you so much for joining us. And Happy for your family. I know that this was probably a bittersweet day for you and the other members on that ceremony earlier today.
Thank you for having me.